Hey everybody, Drew here from Parton The Interruption. We're coming out with the season 2 this fall, but I just wanted to do a quick mini episode about a recent movie I just saw called Experimenter that kind of hit close to home for me. I know I'm a graduate student in experimental psychology, and when I say that, oftentimes what comes to people's mind is the whole shocking people experiment. So what they're thinking of is one of the most infamous experiments in the history of science. A study by Stanley Milgram in 1961 called Behavioral Study of Obedience. He wanted to investigate something he called destructive obedience. So Milgram had been partly inspired by the Holocaust and the atrocities of the Nazis. Just how could people do that to their common man? How could seemingly normal human beings follow orders to slaughter massive amounts of people? In the study, he had participants come into his lab, told them that the study was concerning learning techniques. Participants were to take on the imaginary role of an instructor, and another person, who was secretly in on the whole thing, was going to be the testee.
Hair, grass. Incorrect. 165 volts, strong shock.
Let me out of here!
People then asked the Confederate, the hired actor, questions, and each time the Confederate got one incorrect, participants were instructed to hit a switch that they told would administer an electric shock to the person in the other room. Each time, the participants were asked to increase the shock level, flipping sequential switches from 15 volts to 30 volts, all the way up to 300 volts, which was labeled with XXX on it. Each time, participants were told that the experiment requires you to continue by the experimenter in the room.
You could be dead in there.
Please continue.
Shockingly, the experiment found the majority of participants continued to obey the experimenter and increase the electrocution, even when they heard complaining and screaming from the other room.
In nearly every case, the essential results are the same. They hesitate, sigh, tremble, and groan, but they advance to the last switch, 450 volts, because they're politely told to.
That the average person would willingly, if begrudgingly, harm another human being just because an authority figure told them to. So these findings and the experiment exploded into the social spotlight, drawing horror and ire from scientists and laypersons alike.
Critics insist you're callous,
Unethical.
deceitful,
No one
repugnant.
was forced.
The 2015 movie Experimenter chronicles this study, but also Milgram's life and the fallout of the findings. People often view Milgram as some sort of mad scientist, but in fact, he was the furthest thing from it. People only remember his deception. But I want to dig a little bit deeper and go past the sort of demonizing.
This part's where the experiment really begins.
Firstly, it is very sobering results. It's easy to write off all the Nazis and Germans as terrible people, to dismiss them as just being wrong, and ignore that sort of darkness that resides within us. You have similar sentiment and similar extremism in this country today.
I am the least racist person.
It showed just what kind of terrible things common people could do to each other. And it helped form the field that I'm in of moral psychology. On the bright side, not everybody did go all the way. People kind of overinflated. Obedience rates range from 65% to 10% depending on the condition and other factors.
I designed a series of variations, 25 in all, and continued the experiments over the next 2 semesters.
And most participants showed visible signs of stress and conflict. They didn't want to go through with it, but they did because an authority figure told them to.
Why didn't I stop? Well, cause he told me to continue.
Secondly, the participants weren't traumatized. In psychological experiments, we have to do something called a debriefing. We tell the participants what we did, why we did it, what we're hoping to find. Milgram debriefed his participants, explaining the study to them, explaining that it was all simulated, and that they hadn't harmed anybody. Now, that would be enough for us, but Milgram cared enough that he continued to follow up on those participants and make sure that they were okay. In a follow-up study, roughly 84% of all participants were glad that they had taken part in the survey. 73% of them said that it helped them grow as people, with one saying, "To me, the experiment pointed up the extent to which each individual should have, or discover, firm ground on which to base his decision, no matter how trivial they appear to be. I think people should think more deeply about themselves and their relation to their world and to other people. If this experiment serves to jar people out of complacency, it will have served its end." Milgram went so far as to hire psychiatrists to interview participants and make sure that there was no lasting trauma. And they found that participants had adjusted. They weren't tortured or traumatized. I have never done anything like that for my participants. I don't often even look them in the eye. although that's also social anxiety. Many of the criticisms of Milgram's study were directed at the deception he did, that even though they later found out they hadn't caused any harm, to put people in a situation where they thought that they did was unfair.
He says he's not going to go on. Please continue.
He says he doesn't want to go on.
Furthermore, almost all participants did show severe signs of stress during the study. Some of them hyperventilated. One person fell into a convulsive fit of hysterical laughter.
Who bore the responsibility for the fact that this man was being shocked? I don't know.
But this experiment, as well as the Stanford prison experiment in the 1970s, which, interestingly enough, was also made into a movie last year, helped form the modern code of ethics for psychological science. We're very sensitive to that kind of stuff now. We tend to be a very politically correct field. We gotta call them participants now because we can't say subjects that might be offensive. So, Experimenter didn't get a whole lot of press. I know it did pretty well in a few film festivals, but I didn't even find out about it until about a week ago. But it paints a much better, more human picture of Stanley Milgram.
You're invested in the idea of authority, and you love lording it over all of us.
Peter Sarsgaard, who usually has done a lot of bit parts, is phenomenal as Milgram. It's got a great cast: the late Anton Yelchin, John Leguizamo, Winona Ryder. The dude from Legend of Hercules plays William Shatner in the movie, which is just as odd as it sounds. It's got a bit of an interesting format as well, and it's curious directorial choice. Oftentimes, Milgram will turn and directly speak to the audience. It really, again, helps to humanize him, and sometimes it's almost like a Shakespearean soliloquy. In a way, it's very fitting for the tone of the movie. It's sort of like a classical tragedy that after all of this and after all the pro-social experiments he did afterwards, this is how a great guy like Milgram was remembered, as a mad scientist. So the movie's on Netflix, and I think it's really worth checking out. I haven't seen the Stanford Prison movie. If you all like this, I might do another mini episode discussing that. In the meantime, go ahead and marathon all the classic Parton The Interruption. Be on the lookout for brand new episodes with some new people and new format. That'll all be coming out around November, so I'll see you then.
The person has a choice.
Son of a bitch!
He or she chooses obedience, awareness, liberation, life.